It's not a day for technology. I'm just telling you.
No, it's not. And it really is, in my opinion, it's AI f***ing it all up.
It could be. It thinks it's getting smarter and it's not.
I mean, to me, I've never been more frustrated with the weather in my entire life.
Because there is no easy way to get into this one. But what I found difficult before jumping into this itself was searching for articles, because this is one of those things that nobody talks about, but yet they talk about it all the time, right? They don't talk about the theory of what we're talking about today, right? Hype cycles. So they don't write articles about the hype cycle itself. They talk about products in the hype cycle. So trying to find articles or information that was, directly associated to the history of the hype cycle itself was a little bit more challenging to locate.
I totally agree. It's also like people don't like to admit that it's a hype cycle.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden those tweets from a couple of years ago didn't age real well. Which I think is also another interesting part of it, where, you have to, I don't know. Nobody likes to feel like they got duped.
Yeah.
And so if like people kind of understand it, but it's hard, like trying to understand kind of like the psychology and like the why and the how it's kind of fascinating how you get into kind of, how do you get into these spaces is really crazy.
Yeah. I decided as you know, I used to write a couple different newsletters I've played around with. And one of my fun newsletters, I'd always start with a research on the entomology of a word. Like I'd find a word. I really wanted to know the difference. Where did it come from? What did it really mean? So this morning over a cup of coffee, I had an idea and I'm like, well, hype cycle, like it's a very specific word and we all kind of know what it means. And then I was curious. And what you just said reminded me of this, because the word hype itself is kind of excessive or misleading publicity or advertising on something, right? 1967, American English. The verb is attested from 1937 from hyperbole. I think that's how you say it. Is that how you spell it?
That's exactly how I spelled it. It's weird. You wouldn't think it's spelled that way, but it's hyperbole.
Which I thought was cool, because then it goes back even further, meaning exaggeration or of extravagance, right? Literally means a throwing beyond, like way too far forward, right? Overdoing it. I thought that was kind of cool that you just said, with the text messages, exactly what the word means. And it might even cause someone to believe, is the hype cycle a real thing? Mm-hmm. Or is it basically a marketing ploy or a sales ploy to try to sell something, right?
I think the biggest problem with thinking of hype cycles in general is they're not scientific. And in the world we live in, which everything needs to be scientific now, including our weather, people can dismiss it as a thing because you can't really measure it. And I think that's another interesting problem, because you have it's like people look at it as not very scientific. They also look at it as not very subjective, because like things that can come in like disillusionment and like the words like that aren't exactly quantitative.
Right.
And
right. You can't put clear metrics on top of it.
Well, and also when you think about the, kind of the Gartner's version of the hype cycle, where you have, kind of the 5 phases of like the trigger, peak expectations, the trough of disillusionment, slope of enlightenment, and the plateau of productivity. Like some people look at that as like a workflow almost of like, well, yeah, but what do I got to do to get from one to the next and then one to the next? And it's like, well, this is more of a people problem, not so much of a process where, we collectively feel this way about a certain thing. And, there's a whole bunch of ways that this kind of manifests across society in the way that we look at things. And like technology hype is one of them, but you also see it in like, markets. You also see it in lots of other things throughout pop culture. And it's, there's been some really weird examples of this through time that I know we're going to talk about a little bit later.
Yeah. My question is, because I don't know if I agree specifically that it can't be used as a tool. And I know we're going to talk about that as well, right? Because it's kind of a tool. So I guess my question is...
Well, I think it can be used as a tool, but it's hard to measure.
But is it? So the reason I say that is, as I continue going through and we were researching this, I remembered part of a presentation actually that we used to do for some technology that we were speaking with clients about. And in there, we talked about the Crossing the Chasm, which was based off the book Crossing the Chasm. And I feel like that, though focused on marketing, the information, the logic was sound enough to understand that in this cycle, there is a clear differentiation between your audience when you start and the audience on something, through each of the cycles, basically, as it continues forward. And I found that interesting. So I wonder, is there something you can measure? And maybe it is not as clear cut as, and I agree part what you're saying, but if we really thought about it, is there something I could watch based on some of the other people's information? So as we talk through here, maybe we find something, but it's interesting in my brain that I feel like there is something there where you could watch, especially nowadays, because there's so much public information. Could I watch for a change in social media? Could I watch for a change in communication from people, like that kind of stuff? Like there's got to be some key indicators somewhere.
Well, I think there is. And, the smaller the group, like if you're talking to a client or a small group of people, that's probably easier to measure than it is across kind of like the socioeconomic groups that we have in the broader society.
Right.
But, I think, well, like let's take an example. So like, let's look at AI right now. Everyone and their brother thinks that AI is going to do literally everything. Mm-hmm. It is going to take every job. It is going to replace, we've talked about some of it. It's going to replace all of the artists. It's going to replace all of the factory workers. It's going to replace all of everything. And, while that might be true in some ways, automation's not cheap. Building AI models is not cheap. As an example, I was recently watching a documentary on solar wind factories. And so they're building these gigantic fans. What would you call fans? I guess we're just going to call it fans. And then I'm going to sound like an idiot for calling it a gigantic fan, but they're building the rotors for these gigantic fans. And in these factories, they're huge. They're hundreds of feet long, some of them. Yeah. And yes, you can build automation to try to shape these blades, but it's so expensive, so time consuming, and you still need people to come in and double and triple check everything, that the cost isn't worth it. And so and that to me is like, when you think about the gap between like the peak of inflated expectations, what leads you to the trough of disillusionment is stuff like that, where it's like, yeah, sure, it can do this for me, but is it worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze? Like, who has the money to do all of this stuff potentially? And is it really going to gain you value from a business perspective?
That's exactly it, right? What's the ROI for the amount of work it takes to automate that task? And we've seen that in technology in many areas. That's a question that should be asked most of the time. Even a developer working by himself, sitting or herself, sitting at a computer, who decides they want to write code to automate something they do because they thought it'd be really cool to write the code, but they're only going to use it once. So actually, when they're done and they've automated it, they're done. Yeah. Like, so the extra hours and the late nights and all the coffee you drank, was it worth that automation when you maybe use it once again or twice again? And it's a question. And for a large organization, it's the same thing. You're right. So it's that one you can measure. So what is the actual ROI for the amount of work done on it? And it's, besides the point, actually changing topic on that, besides for the fact that we know AI in itself is nowhere near being able to take everything over. Like, that's not going to happen either. But
some things, sure, but
it works still better as an assistant in my mind, right? You know, it helps you double down on the work you're doing in many areas. Mm-hmm. I am curious, and we'll test later to ask it more questions on the process of the hype cycle and see what it thinks, and if you could create an engine out of it just for fun. But
well, I think it'd be interesting to, when we talked a little bit about the phases, but maybe we kind of talk about them a little bit more, and then kind of go into a little bit of history of some of the things. But there's really five major things. There's a technology trigger. It's really like, hey, here's this early kind of proof of concept. Here's this interesting thing that's out there. And, maybe it takes a little while to bake, but all of a sudden, like, people come up with a new interesting way to use it, or it becomes cheaper, or it becomes more accessible. And all of a sudden, people start to love it. And, there's an interesting, kind of the FOMO effect, the whole fear of missing out. And it's like, oh, well, these people are using it. These people, and all of a sudden it starts gaining this momentum, and you start to ride this wave up, which is really the, kind of getting to the peak of inflated expectations, which is the second phase. And it's all of a sudden, and you can see this through history, and there's some super interesting things. It's like, this thing is going to do everything for us. It's going to completely change the world. And some things do, but also most of them don't. Correct. And, what ends up happening is now that you ended up in the third phase, which is the trough of disillusionment, which is like, oh my gosh, I thought this thing was going to make me eggs and bacon every morning. I thought I was going to do my laundry. I thought I wasn't going to have to go to a job. And then all of a sudden you realize that a lot of the things that people thought just aren't going to happen. They're not economically feasible. They're just not.
Or not happen today. Like, it could happen in the future, just not today.
Well, and what happens is a lot of people fall off that hype bandwagon. You end up back with really the people that created that technology trigger, maybe plus, a little bit more, end up kind of like, okay, guys, like, what worked and what didn't work. And you start to crystallize around certain ideas and thoughts. And then that's where you end up in kind of the plateau of productivity. It's like, oh, well, this is what it's really good at. Now, how do we start to roll this thing out in some ways that start to make sense? And, just like a quick example, like blockchain, which was, a couple of years ago was really at the peak of inflated expectations. Then nobody was talking about it. Lots of people were really just kind of ragging on it about how it's not anything anymore. But we're starting to get to what I would call more the plateau of productivity. There's some interesting things that are being done in that space outside of the crypto world. And I don't want to talk about that yet, but that are actually pretty interesting, that have a pretty clear path towards being a very productive tool in kind of the overall technology tool set.
It's kind of like it's finding its place. And it's almost what this graph is showing is things come in, they are seen as the end all be all. They're going to save the world. Next best thing since sliced bread, as the old statement goes. And then like you said, everybody realizes it isn't good, and then at some point it finds its home, or it dies, like one or the other. So yeah, like you said, blockchain is in enlightenment at the moment. Like you said, blockchain wallets, cryptocurrency, general decentralization of applications overall. Like, what does the technology actually help us do? Where does it fit?
That's right.
And that's for almost any technology, and they're all in different places at different times.
Well, and I think the interesting part is, like, you see this a lot in technology, but it happens all throughout society in many, many different ways, where, you know, a lot of what you see in the market, like the financial markets, the stock market, there are absolutely hype cycles that run through the stock market. Some of those are triggered by technology and some of them aren't. And then there's things in pop culture like, you know, bell bottoms and, you know, avocado toast and whatever that are out there. And as an interesting side note, by the way, just thought of this from bell bottoms. I was recently in LA for a conference, and we were staying at a hotel, and the hotel had this nightclub next to it. We were having a dinner. I ended up leaving about 11:30, maybe closer to midnight, but it was late. And I walk outside, and there's just a million people out there, but there was a strange number of people dressed in like full-blown 1970s disco clothes. Okay.
Was it a themed event, you think?
No,
it could have been a themed event.
This was not a themed event.
Okay.
And I mean, talking about full-blown hair, I mean, like, it was fascinating. It was a very fascinating social commentary.
Well, I know some of the people I watch on YouTube, one of them was talking about the fact that terrible things that we know are killing us, like smoking, and other things are coming back again because the youngest generation is kind of thinking these things are cool again. So even though they're terrible and they're going to kill you like that, they're bringing them back. So maybe that was the same, you know, they looked and liked the hairstyle and they liked the pants again.
Well, and that's, I think, the interesting part of the hype cycle itself, where they can happen more than once. And depending on, you know, especially in some of the pop culture stuff, but they can happen more than once. But, you know, it even really happens in technology. Now that I think about it, think about like the iPhone. And it's like, oh, well, we're going to go with really narrow bezels, and then we're going to go with this color, and then we're going to go with rounded edges, but then we're going to go with more sharp edges. And like, it just cycles back through from, you know, what is.
Well, cars did that too. You know, square cars, rounded cars, big cars, little cars, you know, you see all the muscle cars coming back, and, you know, 4-wheel drive vehicles, things like that. Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. You know, I think, you know, you see these things just kind of cycle back and forth, and it's fascinating when you look at it through the lens of hype. And, you know, it's really difficult to measure, but if you can think about these different phases of this overall hype cycle, it's interesting to kind of look at where things are and kind of figure out where they might be on this curve. And, you know, you're never going to pick it by the day or by the month, but you can kind of tell when things are going well and when they very well may fall off for a certain set of technologies.
Yeah. The other one I thought of with that is the AI, right? So we had talked about it earlier in the week, even, was AI winter. And I didn't realize someone defined it specifically as the stalling and resetting, like you're saying, is just called the winter in the hype cycle. But AI winter I found interesting because I remember working with AI technologies, you know, years ago. And it's the understanding that 1966 failure of machine translations. In 1969, then they tried to do single layer artificial neural networks. Didn't really take on. They flattened again. DARPA's frustration with speech understanding research they were doing in 75. You go to Lisp machines on the market in 87, and then that collapsed. Then we go and we look at cancellation of spending on AI by the Strategic Computing Initiative in 1988. Then there was other systems that came out in the 90s. They tried to do the 5th generation computer to try to get it done. Like it keeps coming back. Like we're going to, this time is AI, this time is AI. And something stopped it, whether it was general funding, but it always stopped because like you said, the hype dropped. First it was, this is going to be the next best thing. And then when it wasn't, everyone pulled the money. And when people pulled money, then all of a sudden it all, failed, went into this winter, and then sat in the winter waiting for it to come back. It's like Game of Thrones, it's.
Well, I think a lot of these cycles, especially in some of the tech stuff especially around AI, has to do with the broader markets. Is money cheap and easy? Is the market going really well? Is the core part of your business doing really well and bringing in a lot of money where you can justify spending large amounts of capital on these things? And when the answer to that is yeah, you see spending on a lot of these, kind of forward looking technologies. And when the answer is no, it tends to fall off because those dates that you talk about, early 70s, you have the gas crisis, you had kind of the market crash in the late 80s, the .com crash in 2000, and you can just see how correlation through the
whole thing. Yeah, it's very interesting in that, and consistent. I mean, there is consistency in the model, otherwise it wouldn't be used today.
That's
people continue to use this model, and Gartner continues to create it because there's some truth to all of these. Mm-hmm. Now, what gets perceived as the next, future piece of the hype cycle is going to change, because that's just, people guessing, and it's, intelligent guessing, but it's guessing still, and the world will decide where it's going. But the first part of it and the learning from all the hype cycles, I think, is very important. If you go back and you look at the beginning of the hype cycle for anything, any technology or non-technology, there's things to learn from it. So whether you were trying to create a startup, whether you're trying to invest in something, whether you're looking for the next hype, I think that data is very valuable, and it can lead to strengthening your own research for something you're working on.
Yeah. I mean, there's money to be had in speculation, and getting on board of a hype train, whatever that is, at the earliest stop is going to be the most beneficial. But you also have the many things that never reach it.
Right.
And, which kind of brings up another, there's plenty of people that try to build a hype cycle that are very interested in only really getting to that peak of inflated expectations so that they can grow. And then at the end they can sell and they don't care. Honestly, right. That really has been the model of a lot of startups over the last 20 years.
Well, it is a business to make money. It is a business to make money for that. But
the reason that I say that is they're not really interested in making money as a company. When you look at some of the interesting companies that are out there that have made zero money in profit, and the only thing they're really interested in doing is growing users. It's I want to be a unicorn startup, hit hyper growth, and then exit. And you end up with these weird kind of companies that have never made any money, looking at you, Uber, and that have interesting products but have never been able to make money off of it.
Yeah.
And it's because you can, if you can trigger a hype cycle around your product or your product category, there's a lot of money to be made there, and you don't really have to be concerned about making actual profits as a company. You need to be concerned with making people think that you're growing.
Perception over reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason they gave me pause too is that it's kind of a business model where, you're creating a startup with the focus of selling it.
That's right.
So some of those we're hoping to sell to a larger organization. So again, get in, create your startup, and go sell it to make your money. I'm not going to make money in the business. I'm going to sell the intellectual capital. I'm going to sell the the customer list. I'm going to sell the product itself, whatever, but I'm selling it to somebody else who wants it more than I do, right? I just want to make my money, get out and go start my next business.
Yep.
Now it is a real thing.
I was a part of one of them in the past where they were making decisions that didn't seem to make any sense. And I was a product person at the company, technical product person, kind of leading one of the products. And they weren't making decisions that made long-term financial sense. They were making decisions that made the books look good. And I finally realized that. And then about 6 months later, they went to IPO.
Yeah.
And it's
they
like,
had a very specific
okay, well, there you go. That makes lots
after.
of sense now. Like,
yeah. They had a specific goal. They knew what they wanted to do. They just didn't tell everybody what they were actually focused.
I mean, that's fine if you go make money however you can, I guess. But, it's just, it becomes interesting when you look across, especially in the technology space or engineering space, when you look across the way that money's being spent and, where the, kind of the overall direction is pointing. If you look at it through the lens of what are those company goals, it'll start to make more sense. Because I've talked to a lot of engineers that are like, I don't know why we won't do this, why we won't focus on making the foundation of this application better, why we're not focused on these things. And you can think about it from these different lenses and it starts to become a little bit more clear.
Watch where the money goes. Let's go and look at it. Organizations on a large level, and you and I know this well, but there's many reasons for many of those decisions. I don't want to beat anybody up for it. We are good at being beating things up. I want to have a little more fun this time. So I'm going to give you a fun story and we'll go from here. Now, this morning over coffee, I called my girlfriend and I remind her we're doing our recording. And then I remembered a conversation we had, which was even more fun because she talked about this doll she had as a kid. She hated this doll. Like she thought it was ugly as hell, but everybody liked these things. And it was those Cabbage Patch dolls. So there's a hype cycle around this thing, which follows the same like any of the tech we're talking about or anything else, but it's non-tech, right? For anybody who's non-tech. And what was really cool is I decided, okay, I want to go back and look, what was the hype cycle for this thing? And what were the triggers that caused it to cross the chasm, as I was saying before, which moves it from being a small, innovative little product to get it out to a key group of people? And how did they do that? So it became mainstream, right? And everybody wanted it. And I'm like, well, what were those key tags on it? It was kind of fun. And we see it today now with social media in some areas, people trying to do this. And it was like celebrity endorsements, have a limited supply. So you create demand, right? I forgot about this part. And she was telling me, which was adoption events. You could adopt the Cabbage Patch doll. So it actually had its own paperwork and everything to adopt, just like you were adopting children. Like crazy idea. Because then it provides mental ownership. Like you own, not that you really own when you adopt, but you own the doll. You've taken on the responsibility of taking care of the doll. Is a better way to say it. And then creating it to be a collectible. So anybody who is trying to do collections, kind of like those little, you said it the other day, those little stuffed animal things.
Babies.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Same thing. The limited supply, I think, is really interesting. And there's a lot of people now that seemingly limit the amount of product that they put out
on purpose
to try to do this. And it's like, we're sold out. Like you can't get them. And
I think Apple does it with their products.
Yeah. I mean, and it's, when people like to feel like they are unique, and when they have stuff that no one else does, they can feel unique. But if it's a thing that everyone has, even if it's a great product, it becomes less, you're going to fall out of that hype pretty quickly.
Yeah, because people can't show off to their friends.
That's right.
You can't.
I mean, you can't post it on the gram and show all of your your followers what you got.
Yeah. But it makes me also think about that, back to like AI and everything else we're talking about is, what of these techniques are happening from even a technology space. So as I'm thinking of the Cabbage Patch dolls and the Beanie Babies, then my brain just went and said, well, there's a limited supply of developers that can do AI. And every client we talk to now wants to figure out, how do I plug in AI into anything they're doing? Like, I was literally working on something this week that is saying any organization that wants to compete in the future has to have this technology in place as commonplace to move forward. You will not compete in the future if you don't have something in this space. Now, is that true or not? We'll find out, because again, as this thing falls off the end of the cliff, we're going to see where it lands, right? But right now, everybody's asking, and there's short supply. So is that short supply the same limited supply like these dolls and these Beanie Babies? And
Well, and what does that short supply do? It drives up the price.
Yep.
And when the price starts to go up, you now get people like, so I remember the Cabbage Patch stuff. I remember the Beanie Babies, but I lived through Tickle Me Elmo. And I was the department manager of a toy department at Kmart the year that the Tickle Me Elmo thing came out. And to see grown ass women like almost beat each other up over this Tickle Me Elmo doll is something that is just, there's nothing that I am going to physically fight someone over.
Exactly.
But that's a whole different thing. But it drives up the price for these things, which then brings out people that are looking to make a buck, where it's like, oh, well, I can go buy this thing and I can sell it on eBay for whatever. Like not too long ago, you could buy a bottle of sriracha on eBay for like $200.
Right, exactly, because they weren't making it for a while.
You just couldn't get any.
Yep.
And I think to pull it back towards like the AI developers, like there's so few that really know how to do some of this stuff, that the price of them is getting really expensive, which is then making the price of overall development really expensive. And so the ROI that you're going to get from some of these development projects has to be so much greater because the costs are so high. And, where like that to me is where you start to break on some of this, like where the hype cycle starts to break, because it's, yes, like I would love to have this injected into everything, but it's so expensive. To go back to like, my windmill fan example, like it's so expensive that it's just not worth it. And, with LLMs the way that they are, what are they actually good at? And is the thing that you're actually trying to do going to show value?
Yeah, I wonder what's going to...
And honestly, also to pull it back to the very, very beginning about the weather, like, it's not always about what is the most mathematically correct answer. It's about what is the best for the customer. And there's been a few times where I have been on the phone with an AI bot and I've about lost my mind because they can't understand what I'm saying.
Right. And they won't bring you to the operator. Yeah.
Whew, I mean, just so frustrating. And, I was on the phone with Amazon not too long ago. I had purchased two things from Amazon that were similar. So parts for my Jeep, I had bought front axle shafts and I had bought rear axle shafts. And I needed to return one of them because I bought the wrong spline count. And long story short, they didn't refund my money, and I had to get a hold of Amazon to get it refunded. And the AI is like, tell me in a few words what product you're looking at.
Right.
And I kept saying like rear axle shafts. Well, it only heard axle shafts, and it kept pulling up the front axle shaft. And it's like, is this what you're looking for? No, tell me what you're looking for. And I'm just getting in this, and my blood pressure is going up, and I'm like, ooh, just give me to someone, please. And that's not a great experience.
No, not at all. It actually ruins customer experience instead of increasing customer experience, which is what they're trying to do with it. Mm-hmm. A whole different conversation, right? It needs to be smart enough to know when to hand you off. Right.
To bring it back to the hype cycle, like, okay, well, you injected something because, you thought you had to put AI into your salt shaker, looking at you, Smoltz. And, was it worth it? Maybe. But I think once you get a couple years down the road,
why do they fall? Yeah, but it goes back to the question of why do things fall out of, what is the slope of enlightenment? Why do they fall off of the slope, right? Because to that, it's a technical limitation, or it's adoption, right? It's what's the word I would want? People are not awestruck by it anymore, right? It's it sounded like it'd be amazing, like you said earlier, but it wasn't. Just give me a person to talk to on the phone for that example, or I've used AI for a year now. Why am I paying for this tool? It only does 20% of what I thought it would, right? It doesn't help me in my day to day.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
I think I don't think we're going to deep dive into this one, but some of the smart speakers, I think, fall into this category where, you go back 3 or 4 or 5 years ago and it was just everybody was buying an Alexa or the Google one or the Apple one. And like, there was all this hype, they're pushing just app developers and everybody, building all of this stuff into there. And then people, I kind of saw this one from the beginning, but people started to realize that maybe you can't order from Amazon based on just text, like voice text. It's like, maybe if it's like, hey, reorder me something that I've already ordered a bunch of times, like maybe. But if I were to say like, hey, order me an umbrella for my deck that's red, like, I don't think that's going to work out real well.
Yeah. Because it doesn't know your preferences and choices and how you would choose it. Now, it might be able to predefine a search for you that you go look online later at and then pick the one you want. But the hype died. Yeah.
But then at one point, like, that is a terrible experience. I'm going to talk to this speaker to have it create a list so that I have to go back on my phone or my laptop or whatever to go back and look at. Like, that's not helpful.
It's not really saving you anything, right?
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that I use it for is to play some music in my bathroom. Like, that's it. That's like about the only thing that I actually use it for.
I finally decided to start replacing mine with Sonos speakers. I decided to go and I always wanted to do the Sonos. The music coming out of those little things is nice, but in a giant room with a 20-foot high ceiling, it just doesn't cover the room. Yeah. So I finally started replacing them because I don't use it for anything except for talking to my home automation. Like, I tell it to turn lights on and off, that kind of stuff, but I don't use any other feature on it. I don't do room announcements. And one other thing I do use that's useful is I create my shopping list. So if I remember I need something, it's nice enough to write it on the list. But those are very small features for what you pay and the setup of all of this stuff.
Yeah.
I thought I read an article, and maybe to your point, maybe it's something we talk about later, but I thought I read an article somewhere that Google or somebody else started doing more voice, like voice search or something else, or like there was another new version of something that just came out on that.
Well, I think the like voice search is still very interesting. It, being able to, like, what is the next phase? And I know we're going to dig into this one, but what's the next phase of smartphones? And it's getting rid of the phone is essentially it, right? And you've seen like the Apple Vision Pro and other kind of VR type things. And, they don't have a touch interface. So you have to have voice search and those kinds of things. And so like that stuff. And I think when you like to bring it back to the hype cycle with the smart speakers, like, the plateau of kind of productivity, like I think the good thing that came out of some of those speakers is the voice search, because that enables other tools, like take the best of this thing, embed it into, kind of the new, whether it's the Vision Pro or the Meta Quest 3 or whatever the hell it is now, and, be able to inject some of those things to make that product better and kind of, consolidation.
Yeah, IoT was the other one, because home automation started to have its own hype cycle again, as more and more companies were creating more and more products that would plug into it. I saw tons of new companies coming out with automation switches for the house, outlets, pluggable controls. There's a guy on YouTube I watch who's always testing this stuff out, and it's great. He has motion detectors, and he has under counter lighting, and he has all this stuff. And it's cool if you want to create the next generation of homes that, you walk through and you don't have to touch a light switch. But, it's a very small group of people that are actually doing that, right?
Yeah. I guess I'm just getting old at this point, but I don't understand the smart light bulbs and everything else like that. Like the light switch is right there. I mean, maybe if I'm walking in with groceries, but then I still have to open the door. It's not like, I mean, having like a smart lock or something might be okay. Even though I've tried one of those and it didn't work really well. Like I don't know. There's like a certain level
what it is, I think.
Lazy that believe me, I'm a pretty lazy guy, but like, I don't know.
I don't see it as lazy. I see it back to.
Well, lazy's not bad. I'm not saying lazy's a bad thing.
I know you're not.
Yeah.
But I think it goes back to perception of, like we said, ROI for automation and things like that, of anything. So, like for me, some of the things that I think are really cool, and some I've done and some I haven't, but I want the lights to turn on in the house at a certain time, because I know out of my habits, I'm going to end up in that room anyway, or I'm going to get up at a certain time. And now they have it so drapes for the window, or shades for the window can open and close. Well, that's great for keeping the heat in late at night in the winter. And it's also nice to get the sunshine in first thing in the morning. So, and I also don't want people looking in my windows when it's late at night. Instead of walking around the house and having to close them all, if I can automate them for a certain thing, that's great. Now, what I can't do, I'd love to do, is actually open the physical window dynamically, but I'm sure that's pretty expensive and I'm not spending that kind of money, right? But those kind of automations, I think, put into your daily life work well. Like I always end up in my kitchen early in the morning. It's dark because now we're getting towards winter.
Yeah.
So the lights come on automatically for me. And I like that. And then I have them turn off, and I know about when I cook dinner, so I have them turn back on for dinner. So yes, the light switch is right there, but it's one less thing I don't have to worry about. I walk in and everything's kind of there. If I could take it to the next level and have it start the coffee ahead of time for me or something like that, maybe, but I don't use a drip coffee machine. I'm very picky about how I make my coffee. So, that won't be automated, but I think there's certain features that make sense. I think there are others that don't. I
agree. And that really is the plateau of productivity. Like this is what it's good at. This is the group of people that are going to be, kind of pulled into this, and the hype is just died, right? Like, but the people that are into that stuff are probably more solidified than they were before. Right. Like, this is great. Like, I love this. Yeah. This does a lot for me.
Yeah. What they say, for what I liked about, and it's a good book. You have to read it, for Crossing the Chasm. It is actually a good book to understand some of the secondary components of this. And the idea of going from innovators to early adopters to early majority, late majority, and laggards, right, is when they buy into that hype cycle. And early adopters and innovators is kind of what we're talking about, because we had the money, we bought the things when they first came out, and we stayed with it or we didn't, but we thought it was a cool thing and we were going to go into it. And there was a really interesting quote that comes from that, and it's early adopters are more interested in the technical features of a new product, while the early majority are more interested in the benefits that the product offers them. So I think that's the same for technology. I think it's the same for products. It's us as techies for any of this. I know one of the things that drew me to it was the technology aspect, setting it up, figuring out how it would work. What could I plug it into? So that made me an early adopter. I was willing to spend the money because I wanted to tinker. I wanted to play with it. If there was benefit afterwards, great. But I was going to tinker, you know?
I totally agree with you. And I think that's, I think that's the interesting part is I find that stuff interesting, but I also know that when I dive into something, I dive deep. And I need to be careful to not go, have a million hobbies and spend just $1 million on stuff.
On all of them, because then your wife will kill you. Yeah,
that's right. We don't need that. It's like, but look, I've completely automated our lives, and it's like, well, yeah, but maybe I don't need that.
Maybe I didn't want that, Mm-hmm. So in the same, going back to the technology side, right? Organizations spend a lot of money following that same pattern, maybe without realizing it, because all technologists and many pseudo technologists, meaning they don't code for a living, right? But they're in some kind of role or job that touches technology, get interested in the new technology and want to play with it. So some projects get started for that reason, where there might not be a big ROI at the end, right? But there's the excitement of trying something new. Well,
there can actually be, and I know we're going to deep dive into this one, so I'm not going to go too deep, but the hype cycles from that perspective can be very dangerous for an actual engine or for a whole enterprise or company or whatever. Right. And you'll see this a lot, or you've seen it a lot over the last handful of years in like the JavaScript framework world, where there's a new JavaScript framework like every week, it seems like. Yes. But it's, oh my gosh, I hate Angular and I want to move to React. Or, oh my gosh, I hate this and I want to move to Vue or to Svelte or to whatever. And there's almost no conversation around making the product better. It's almost all, oh my gosh, this language is garbage and we need to use something different. And, every time I hear the word lift and shift, I want to just scream. Because it's like, so what you're telling me is you're going to spend a bunch of money to move this pile from here over to there, and you're not going to get rid of any of it. You're not going to make it any smaller. You're just going to just move it. Okay, well, that sounds terrible. Like, it sounds like a really bad idea in almost every way possible.
A lot of wasted money.
And, you get people that really buy into some of these different hype cycles around languages, that they'll spend millions of dollars to move to something, all to find out that it sucks. Yeah. And interesting, and not to throw too much shade at people, but there's the two, like Ruby on Rails used to be the thing, man. I think it's actually a really good language. But the hype's fallen out of it, and, everybody acts like it's just complete garbage now. And it's like, well, it's really not, but whatever. And
it was very good at the things it was very good at. Let's put it that way, right? But,
yeah. And, do you need some of these new things? Like people shifted from Java to, oh gosh darn it. It slipped my brain. It doesn't matter. But there's another
one. Like Spring and Spring Boot and all of those components.
No, not Java. It's another language close to Java. It doesn't matter. But people move to it.
Rust, and I was thinking, but Rust is Rust. C, really. Like, yeah. Don't you hate that when you can't remember something?
Like it's. I talked to a client last week about it, and then I talked to another one about it a couple of months ago, where they moved. All right. and it's more complicated. It's harder to use. And the ecosystem's just not as well built out.
Are you thinking like Scala or something like that?
That's it. Yeah. Scala.
Okay.
I'm like, gosh, like what is it? And so
as soon as you said that, because I always have conversations that people can't find developers with the skill set.
Yeah.
And so I talk to companies that want to move to it because they think it's the next best thing. They're coming to us for help because they can't hire anyone.
They can't find it.
And my conversations with them most of the time are, you sure you want to do that? Because the benefit, you're not going to find developers to work on it. So the benefit you think you're going to get in it is not going to be there, because once the consultants leave, you're going to have nobody to support it either, which means either you're paying for consultants forever, or in a short amount of time, you're going to be rewriting it in something else again.
Well, you're just making a bet that this is going to become very popular and that developers are going to stay cheap. And if you're wrong, and I think Scala has a lot of really good attributes. Like I'm not going to say that it's terrible, but it is hard to find people. And the two clients that I talked to about it had that exact problem. I can't hire developers that can do any of this.
Right.
And what I'm having to do is I'm having to,
you know what I mean? Like
take Java devs and convert them into Scala people. And there's different ways of doing it. And they're going to maybe do it well, maybe not do it so well. And is that worth it to you? And like, there's maybe this is something we should dig down into at some point, but choose boring technology. And that's really what this comes down to. Like, choose boring technology. Do you really need whatever new thing this language is promising you? Probably not. Like, especially if you're a big enterprise. The difference between
early adopter and late majority makes a difference, right?
That's right.
I mean, how much time and money you're going to waste, and how difficult it is to manage, right? The other thing we've seen is organizations that allow development teams to keep bringing in these new ideas and test them, but it's not in a very structured manner. Like it's not a proof of concept or spiking out an idea. It's a team just starts using it. The next thing you know, your tech stack for the organization is unruly. It's it's impossible to manage, keep track of, update, or hire for. And those are the organizations that come back and talk to us of, okay, how do I slim this back down?
Yeah.
How do I get some control on this?
Well, build an actual tech radar. Have what I like to call bounded autonomy. Like I'm going to draw a box. The box might be very big, but you need to live inside of this box. Have ADRs.
Just putting guardrails up. Right.
Yeah. Have a decent set of enterprise architecture. Right. And say, this is what we're going to do and why.
Right. And you can keep it. The worst thing is everyone thinks when we do that we're locking them down and developers get annoyed, but you can do it in a really nice way. You can have it so from a top level EA architecture or solutions architecture level, wherever you want to look at this, you're saying, okay, these are my guardrails. These are the general technologies, platforms, techniques, everything that I think we should look at. In this bucket, as a team, you pick what makes logical sense for you. You have the autonomy to put together your tech stack for your solution, but just kind of stay in these guardrails.
Well, right? Also having a path for people to come to you and say, hey, I know we're a Java shop, but I would really love to use Go for this particular thing, and here's why, and have them make the case. Like a lot of times when people, developers I talk to feel like they're being put into a box, it's the fact that they don't even feel like their voice can be heard.
Right. They have no one to talk to, or when they go and try to ask, they're just told no.
That's right. And, so like, to kind of pull it back to hype cycles, like that might be the answer. Is, hey, and Go is not in this particular category, but this is a new and emerging technology that does have some promising things. We're not ready to take the chance on having to build this thing and support this thing yet. Maybe in a year. And hey, person that's super intrigued with this new language, how about you be the ambassador for this thing? And as new things come up, how about you bring them back to us so that we can take that new information and see if it fits inside of our architecture? And like that model people can get excited about. It's like, okay, cool. Like it wasn't just a no, shut up, sit down and go back and, keep pounding out code. This allows people to feel like they have a voice and to give that out.
As you mentioned, you have a tech radar, and based on a tech radar, like we use for ThoughtWorks, and I've done, and I think you have too, running workshops, you can put together a secondary model on that allows you to do that type of an assessment where you can see if you're going to adopt a certain technology, go through a trial phase, whether you're going to assess or you're going to hold and get rid of it. So you're going to, it's something you no longer should be using in the organization, or you found it doesn't solve the problem. And I've run a lot of workshops doing it. I think you have too, where we help organizations to use that as a model. I think the two fit together, where you can match that with a hype cycle and then create a strategy from it.
That's right. Yep. And that to me is really the key around all of these different hype cycles, is understand that they're a thing, plot where you think they are on the curve, and build your technology strategy around that to, be smart. Like, yes, like this thing is at this real height of expectations. Like if I chop that in half or in a quarter, like what could I use to benefit me and the products and the company that I have, and be smart. And like that to me is really the lesson to learn from all of this.
Yeah. It's the quote I got the other day from my girlfriend from a movie, and I can't think of the movie, but it was make good choices.
That's right. make good choices.
Make good choices. Well, I know our last thing, and we can end up on here, I think this is a good spot, but we talked about now diving into some of these hype cycles. That's so right. I think as we move forward here, we're going to grab a couple different ones and see where they go.
Yeah. I can't, there's a few of them that I'm really interested in doing, like the birth of the internet. Yeah. And some of the stuff people were saying about it when it was created, like no one's ever going to use this. And, that's a different part of the hype cycle we didn't really talk about too much. It was just like, in the, at the bottom of that like the height of expectations, there's people at the bottom of that just shitting all over it.
Yep. And you see that for that, the laptop, the computer, there was statements said that even if you give everybody a cheap computer, nobody's going to use them.
Nobody's going to use them. And
the same with the same with smartphones, like you said. So there's a really a couple good ones in there that we can talk about.
I look forward to it. I think it's going to be fun and pretty interesting series of stuff.
Yes, I think so as well. Thank you, my friend, as always.
All right. Cheers, man.
Cool. Cheers.